Monsma is a research fellow at the Paul Henry Institute for the Study of Christianity and Politics at Calvin College, as well as Professor Emeritus at Calvin College and Pepperdine University. From 1972 to 82, he served in the Michigan State House of Representatives and Senate, so has real-life experience in politics. He's also worked in the Michigan Natural Resources Commission and the Department of Social Services, and taught at the State University College in New York. His publications include, among others, the book The Disappearing God Gap, Religion in 2008 Elections, which was published in 2010, with Christopher Soper, The Challenge of Pluralism, Church and State in 5 Democracies, one of my favorite books. In 2006, Faith, Hope, and Jobs, Welfare to Work in Los Angeles, also with Soper. And When Sacred and Secular Mix, Religious Nonprofit Organizations and Public Money, published in 1996. Monsma earned his BA at Calvin College, his MA at Georgetown University, and his PhD at Michigan State University. So thank you, Stephen, for coming to speak with us.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for all of you for coming this noon, and I would like to thank both Chris and the Center for the Study of Religion and Society, the Colloquium program, and I think it's the Rooney Center who all were involved in helping to sponsor this event this noon. I hope that I can learn from all of you a little later on when we have a chance to exchange some ideas and questions and thoughts. And hopefully you'll learn at least a little bit from what I have to say today as well. For in my lecture today, I would like to explore threats to the religious freedom of religiously based public service organizations, or as they are usually called today, simply faith-based organizations. The basic outline I'm going to follow is very simple. Going back to the slide. The problem, its underlying causes, and then the solution, although I call it a better way. It's fit presumptuous to say I have a solution. But before getting into the first of these 3 points, I would like to clarify exactly what I mean by religiously based public service organizations. You see it on the, yeah, we're working. These, as I conceive of them, are nonprofit organizations that provide certain temporal, this-world services to the public within the context of certain religious beliefs, values, and traditions. Included, therefore, in the nation are a host of educational and healthcare institutions, international relief and aid agencies, and social service organizations, all of which are religious or faith-based in the sense of being rooted in and reflective of a religious tradition, and are public in the sense of providing services not to a closed membership, but to the general public. It also would include religious congregations in the temporal, this-world services they may offer to the public. Think of a church child care center that they offer child care in their neighborhood. But it excludes religious congregations in their purely otherworldly rituals and celebrations that are at the core of their faith and conducted for their own members. It also excludes for-profit organizations, since they raise somewhat different religious freedom issues. The faith-based public service organizations included in my definition are a diverse lot in terms of their religious character. Some are deeply and explicitly religious in nature, while for others their religious character is more implicit and in the background. Yet even the latter, I would suggest their religious roots are meaningful and important to them. These faith-based organizations are also diverse in terms of the religious traditions in which they are rooted: evangelical, Protestant, mainline Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Mormon, Muslim, etc. But together they are an important part of the educational, healthcare, and social services of the United States. Going on then to the first part of my lecture, namely the problem or the current clash in regard to these religiously based public service organizations. And my first contention is that religiously based public serving organizations are facing challenges to their ability to act freely in keeping with their religious traditions. Most of these threats fall into one of two categories. The first category you see on the slide, it consists of threats to faith-based organizations' ability to determine the religious character of their own members, officers, board members, staff members, perhaps even volunteers. If a religiously based organization is required to accept personnel without regard to their religious beliefs or adherence to their faith traditions' behavioral norms, that organization is in danger of ceasing to exist as a religious organization. This point was made once by Justice William Brennan in a Supreme Court decision dealing with the freedom of association. You see the quotation here from Brennan. There can be no clearer example of an intrusion into the internal structure or affairs of an association than a regulation that forces the group to accept members it does not desire. Such a regulation may impair the ability of the original members to express only those views that brought them together. The freedom of association, therefore, plainly presupposes the freedom not to associate. Nevertheless, several universities and law schools, including Vanderbilt University, San Diego State University, and the Hastings School of College of Law in San Francisco, have denied religious student organizations official recognition and certain advantages and privileges that go with official recognition. Why? Because they require their leaders to accept the religious beliefs and behavioral standards of those organizations' religious traditions. The issue of the denial of a religious organization's ability to take religion into account in its staffing decisions becomes especially acute when that organization has received government funds. There's been much controversy on this point. But the denial of such an ability is no less, I would suggest, of a threat to the religious character of an organization due to government funds being present. Douglas Laycock of the University of Virginia Law School made the needed point in testimony before a congressional committee, where he stated nothing is more important to religious identity than the ability to hire employees who actually support the religious mission and will faithfully execute it. And if you want to take that away, you are saying the religious groups that participate in these government-funded programs have utilized themselves in a very dramatic way. It uses the coercive power of the purse to force religious social service providers to become more secular than they were. Now, if Laycock is correct, then what he was saying, I would suggest it's hard to deny, the ban on faith-based hiring would mean that many faith-based organizations either would have to give up or modify their missions as they had defined them, or give up government funding that their secular counterparts would be receiving. Yet, especially if a faith-based organization is receiving government funds or other benefits or recognitions, many believe they lose their ability to take religious faith into account in determining who does or does not belong. Both the Bush and the Obama administrations have allowed faith-based organizations that receive federal government funds to take religion into account in their hiring. But for doing so, they have been heavily criticized by advocacy organizations such as the ACLU and Americans for the Separation of Church and State, and the editorial writers of the New York Times. Now, a second category of challenges, the second bullet point that you see on the slide, is to faith-based organizations' ability to act in keeping with their faith tradition. And it consists of public policies that have been pressuring them to act in violation of their faith tradition's beliefs. The best known example of this, the most recent one anyway, is the Obama administration's contraceptive mandate, which actually has led Notre Dame to file a suit in federal court asking for protection of its ability to act in keeping with long-held Catholic moral teaching, and led my colleges, Calvin College's health director, to testify before a congressional committee against the same mandate due to abortifacients being included in the mandate as contraceptives. But this is only the most visible example of pressures on faith-based organizations to act contrary to their religious beliefs, the one that has been in the newspapers the most. Several faith-based adoption agencies and foster care agencies, including Catholic Charities of Massachusetts and several evangelical agencies in Illinois, have stopped processing adoptions due to state regulations requiring them to place children with same-sex couples on the same basis as with male, female, and single-parent families. To use the regulatory power of government to pressure a religiously based organization to violate its religious tenets seems to me to be almost the very definition of the violation of religious liberty. Okay, that's the first one, what I see as the threat or the problem. But I think it's important, and I'll spend more time on this second section, if we're going to deal with this threat, respond to it in a thoughtful manner. It's very important that we understand some of the background and the causes of it. For one would think the United States, with our long heritage of religious freedom, and where the early advocates of religious freedom, such as James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, are still held in high regard, one would think the United States might be one of the last countries whose faith-based organizations would face challenges to their freedom to act in keeping with their religious faith. It is only as we understand the underlying causes of today's religious freedom threats that one can respond to those threats in a thoughtful, effective manner. Some have claimed the reason faith-based organizations are facing the same threats I just described is that there is a war on religion going on, that there are persons who hate all religion and are self-consciously seeking to limit and undercut its influence. However, I am convinced the reason lies elsewhere. I don't think that's the problem. Rather, it lies in a mindset that has blinded those marked by it to the damage that they are doing to religious liberty. This mindset is broadly dominant in American thinking, as found in liberal advocacy organizations such as the ACLU and in most major universities and editorial offices of the New York Times, CNN, and other major news outlets. As a quick aside, the second bullet point there, I'm using the term mindset, and I'll be using that term more often in this lecture, so I think I need to explain what I mean by it. It's a rather, I'm using it in an eclectic sense, as a mix of theoretical concepts, predispositions, beliefs, values, assumptions, and patterns of thought that mark the manner in which persons react to and view phenomena and events. Thus, a mindset is something less than a worked-out political or social theory, but something more than one might call simply a gut reaction. It combines ideas and concepts that one has thought through with leanings or assumptions towards which one's background and experience has, often unselfconsciously, predisposed him or her. Now, I would suggest there are two aspects or steps in the dominant mindset in American society towards faith-based organizations that has put their religious freedoms at risk. The first is to believe, or better the assumption that religion is a purely private matter found in churches, synagogues, mosques, and other religious congregations, and the prayers and religious rituals and observations conducted by them. Also included are individual private prayers and devotional readings we as individuals and families practice in the privacy of our own homes. Under this assumption, it is religion of this nature that the First Amendment was designed to protect. Almost all Americans, certainly in theory and almost always in practice, are willing to defend vigorously freedom of religion of this sort. and this surely is good. However, seeing religion only as a private matter and protecting only religion of a private, personal nature are serious mistakes and lead to the sort of threats to religious freedom I discussed earlier. I'll come back to that point in just a moment, but first we need to see the second step or conclusion to which the first step in today's dominant mindset leads. It is the belief that when faith-based organizations provide services to the public, they are no longer truly or fully religious, but secular-like agencies. Religious organizations stop being religious when they enter the public realm to offer temporal, this-world services to the public. And then the same rules that apply to all other organizations providing such services also apply to them. If religion has only to do with worship service and the core rituals and celebrations of one's faith, and personal private prayers and devotional readings in the privacy of one's own home, then of course offering hospice care to the dying, drug rehabilitation for the addicted, and development of the impoverished village in Africa are really not religious acts. This position was illustrated in 2002 in a study authorized by the American Civil Liberties Union. This study said, in part, when religiously affiliated organizations move into secular pursuits, such as providing medical care or social services to the public, they should no longer be insulated from secular laws. In the public world, they should apply public rules. This quotation puts forward two ways in which a religious organization is turned into a non-religious organization. One, by providing supposedly secular services, such as medical care and social services, and two, by offering those services not merely to its own members, but to the general public. This mindset was recently on full display in connection with the Obama administration's contraceptive mandate I mentioned a moment ago. This directive provides for a religious exemption for those religious organizations whose consciences would forbid them from providing such services. Well and good. But a huge problem remains because this religious exemption is rooted in the view of religion as limited to religious congregations and their core religious practices and rituals conducted for their own members. The religious exemption applies only to religious congregations and congregation-like organizations that engage in religious rituals and celebrations for their own members. But the Obama administration did not see a need to protect the religious freedom of non-church, faith-based schools, hospitals, adoption agencies, and other such organizations offering service in the public square. In doing so, it followed the dominant American mindset that holds that they are not really religious entities, but by entering the public realm of health, educational, and social services, they have left the religious realm for the secular realm. Now, since then, the Obama administration has backtracked somewhat and now recognizes that religious liberty is at issue here, therefore is promising a compromise that in part meets the threat to the religious freedom of faith-based public service organizations that have problems with the contraceptive mandate. But the fact that it initially had only the very narrow religious exemption I described earlier, and the fact that it was praised by leading liberal organizations such as the ACLU and by major papers such as the New York Times, is revealing of the strength of this mindset in American society today. Similarly, when an evangelical Protestant or Catholic Charities agency concludes that in good conscience they cannot place children for adoption with same-sex couples, the mindset I'm describing here sees it as engaging in invidious discrimination. It is offering a supposedly non-religious, secular service in the public sphere and to use one's religious beliefs to help shape those services is, in this mindset, to engage in discrimination. Also, when a university Christian student club insists leaders need to be Christians who abide by traditional Christian moral standards, including sexual and moral standards, it is accused of invidious discrimination that a church that insists on the same moral standards for its clergy would not be accused of. Clearly, the Student Religious Club is seen as not being religious, or at least as not being religious in the same way that a church or synagogue or mosque would be seen. Okay, but all this leaves a deeper question of why or how this mindset developed in the United States. And I think it's important for us to consider this question, why this mindset? If we are to develop an alternative to it, it's important to understand the deeper why question. And I believe its roots go all the way back to the founding era of the United States, and most founders believed that religion of a particularistic nature was both irrelevant to the political sphere and ought to be kept out of the political sphere. Franklin, Jefferson, Madison all believed this. This original belief was reinforced in the 19th century when evangelical Protestantism became a dominant cultural force in the United States, following what was called the Second Great Awakening. I had a bunch more on that, but I ended up on the cutting room floor to save a little time, so you're fortunate there. But I'll just summarize. 19th century evangelicalism was a very decentralized populist movement weak in social and political thinking. It did not use its dominant position in American life to develop political and social theories that defined a public role for religion and religiously based organizations. Meanwhile, in 19th century America, there were also reformers in the classic liberal mold. Many of them were New England Unitarians who rejected evangelical Christianity, relegated particularistic religion to the private sphere, and sought to build one nation based on tolerance and national patriotism. They were the moving force behind the common school as a key to achieve their goals, or what we call, of course, the public schools today. They were not anti-clerical, as many of their European counterparts were, but made their peace with a nation marked by a dominant evangelicalism by accommodating themselves to a genial, warm, one might say fuzzy Christianity that reassured all that this was a Christian, indeed a Protestant nation, yet committed no one to the tough particularistic beliefs of historic Christianity. The liberal reformers were happy because particularistic Christian beliefs, they termed them sectarian beliefs, were excluded from the common schools and elsewhere in the public square. Evangelical Protestants, with a rather shallow theology, were happy since a gloss of Christianity was allowed into the public square, and both were happy because Catholics were excluded. Sorry about that. Religion in its specific manifestations was left in the private realm of religious congregations and their religious services and rituals and private personal prayer and devotion. Then, as the 20th century advanced, evangelical Protestantism lost its battle with forces of modern scholarship and biblical interpretation, and the United States gained in religious diversity. The end result in the post-World War II era was a series of Supreme Court decisions and some legislative enactments that peeled away most of the gloss of Protestant Christianity that had been incorporated into public life during the 19th century. Witness the banning of prayers and Bible reading in the public schools and attacks, some successful, on religious symbols and activities present in public places or meetings. After all, if religion is a purely private, personal matter that takes place in religious congregations or in the privacy of one's own home, it is left without a legitimate role in the public life of the nation. In summary, then, the important point is that these forces have led to a mindset that sees religion, outside of a generalized civil religion, as personal and private, revolving around church and home in their religious celebrations and rituals. That is why many today can claim, and I think sincerely believe, that they are fully supportive of religious freedom and yet force faith-based organizations to take actions that would undercut their religious nature and to act contrary to their religious beliefs. The problem is that while their mindset sees religious congregations and their faith's core religious rituals and celebrations as indeed being religious, it relegates religiously based organizations and their temporal this world service activities to a secular, public, non-religious category. The problem, oops. Here we go. The problem is that, this thing is flashing red, so I'm not sure, we may lose it. The problem is that this is a factually inaccurate picture of the world. For most Christians and for many other deeply religious persons, feeding the hungry, caring for the sick, and releasing those who are oppressed are as much religious acts as kneeling in prayer or partaking in the Eucharist. And to provide material help and aid only to their own members would be a violation of their faith. It would be sinning against the God who cares for all who are in need. An official statement of the National Association of Evangelicals, for example, testifies to its belief in the public nature of religion. The first bullet point. Jesus said, quoting this statement, Jesus said that those who do not care for the needy and the imprisoned will depart eternally from the living God. You know, we evangelicals always like to threaten people with hell, even when we're polite enough that we don't use the H word. And the Catholic Bishop's electioneer document that some of you may have be acquainted with, Forming Conscience for Faithful Citizen, quotes Pope Benedict XVI as teaching that love for widows and orphans, prisoners, and the sick and needy of every kind is as essential to the Church as the ministry of the sacraments and the preaching of the gospel. Very powerful, very clear. The public serving nature of religion was clearly summarized by Robert Bellah and his associates in their famous Habits of the Heart book when they wrote, quote, "Yet religion, and certainly biblical religion, is concerned with the whole of life, with social, economic, and political matters, as well as with private and personal ones." In short, the public serving nature of religion is a fact. To insist that public serving religion is not religion is to force it into a mold that is contrary to the nature of most religions and is a violation of their religious freedom. For government to insist or to assume an organization is non-religious in nature when it itself is insisting it is deeply religious in itself raises serious religious freedom issues. Okay, we've gone through what I see as the threat, the problem, and the background to it. Now, what is a better way, or the solution part, the third part of my talk? For this leads me to the third major part of my lecture today. In my thinking, a better way for dealing with faith-based service organizations' religious freedom should be rooted in a new mindset. The old mindset is the problem. A new mindset is called for. A mindset that recognizes faith-based public service organizations as genuinely religious organizations and engage in activities infused with religious meaning for their adherents. Just as the current defective American mindset is rooted in 19th century American movements, I believe a new, better mindset can be found in concepts and patterns of thought that emerged from events and movements in 19th century Western Europe. That, in turn, led to the Christian democracy movement. The situation in Western Europe, especially in Germany, France, and the Netherlands, presented a different situation than what the United States experienced in the 19th century. a traditional populist Christianity did not sweep through and come to dominate European societies as it did in the United States. There was no second great awakening sweeping through the countries of Western Europe. However, Christianity, although weaker in numbers than in 19th century United States, remained more firmly rooted in structures and traditions more amenable to social and political thinking. In the Catholic structures in Germany, especially in Lutheran, evangelical structures, and I'm talking about the Netherlands, then in the neo-Calvinist or Reformed structures of the Netherlands. In addition, this thinking was stimulated, the thinking by these major religious Christian traditions was stimulated by two major political movements that challenged traditional Christianity: classic liberalism and socialism, or social democracy. A more vigorous liberalism than the United States experienced emphasized the individual free from constraining authority of existing governing class and religious authorities. It took an anti-clerical cast and saw religion as a danger to free individuals flourishing as national citizens. Meanwhile, as the 19th century and industrialization progressed, social democracy or socialist critiques of prevailing conditions increased and provided a stronger challenge to traditional Christianity than it did in the 19th century United States. Social democrats advocated a wider franchise for the working classes and the use of the state to control the industrialized units of production. Such efforts, especially in their more extreme socialist forms, were seen by their opponents as a collectivism that would create an all-powerful state that would threaten personal freedoms. Out of this situation, Pope Leo XIII and later popes and Catholic thinkers developed what has been referred to as a third way that rejects both the extreme individualism of liberal thought and the collectivist tendency of socialist thought. Catholic scholar Kenneth Grassel has rightly referred to, quote, efforts by German Catholic thinkers to forge an alternative to the individualism and libertarianism of 19th century liberalism and the collectivist statism of its socialist adversaries. At the same time, in the Netherlands, Abraham Kuyper, a Dutch Reformed or Neo-Calvinist theologian, founder of the Dutch Protestant Christian Democratic Party, and for one term, Prime Minister, was forging a Protestant neo-Calvinist response to the challenge posed by 19th century liberalism and socialism that bore many similarities to the Catholic response. It's interesting to note that Pope Leo XIII released his famous encyclical, Rerum Novarum, in May of 1891. 6 months later, in November 1891, Kuyper gave a major address to a neo-Calvinist social congress in the Netherlands. It is still in print and read today. In it, he acknowledged the similarities between the two Catholic traditions. Quoting, you see the quote on the screen, "We must admit to our shame that the Roman Catholics are far ahead of us in their study of the social problem. Indeed, very far ahead. The action of the Roman Catholics should spur us to show more dynamism. The encyclical Rerum Novarum of Leo XIII states the principles which are common to all Christians and which we share with our Roman Catholic compatriots." Now, my point here today is that 19th century political currents in Western Europe led and maybe pushed together Catholic and some Protestant thinkers to formulate social political concepts that in turn engendered a mindset that came to understand the nature, role, and freedoms of faith-based public service organizations in quite different ways than the way they came to be viewed in the United States. It is helpful to take a closer look at this Catholic neo-Calvinist third way, although I'm coming out of a neo-Calvinist background, maybe getting more credit to the neo-Calvinists than they're due, but hey, we all have our biases. Central to this third way, as forged by Catholic thinkers, was the concept of subsidiarity. And it did not merely steer a middle course between classic liberalism and socialism, but was genuinely rooted in a Christian view of human beings and human society. And I'm assuming that a Protestant guy from Calvin does not need to come to Notre Dame to lecture you on what subsidiarity is. But what I do want to emphasize is that subsidiarity is not merely a theory seeking to promote in pragmatic fashion the most efficient accomplishment of societal goals, nor is it simply an anecdote to over-centralization of political power. You have to go back to Kenneth Grosso. Yep, here he is. Grosso has made this point well in this quotation, and it's worth taking a careful look at it. Subsidiarity embodies far more than a simple recognition of the dangers of over-centralization. Likewise, far from being a mere prudential expedient, subsidiarity is rooted in a principled commitment both to the centrality of freedom in human life and to what might be termed institutional pluralism. The idea that human flourishing requires a wide range of institutions and communities. Subsidiarity thereby results in a conception of intermediary social structures that respect their rightful autonomy. Gotta go back. Okay, here we go. Two contemporary Dutch scholars, Van Kiersbergen and Verbeek, have put it, subsidiarity, the quote you see here, stresses the relative autonomy of social organizations in the context of a plural society. This autonomy is rooted in social structures' God-given nature as necessary, inherent aspects of human society. They are not creatures of the state, nor constructs of individual human choice or social engineering. Thus, their existence and the role they play in society are theirs as a right. Now, coming back to my friend Abraham Kuyper, Calvin would refer to him as Father Abraham. On the Protestant side, Kuyper developed the concept of what he called sphere sovereignty. The overall picture that is crucial for our purposes was described well by Kuyper at Princeton University in 1898 when he was invited to give the Stone Foundation lectures that year. You see the quotation on the slide. In a Calvinistic sense, we understand hereby that the family, the business, science, art, and so forth are all social spheres which do not owe their existence to the state and which do not derive the law of their life from the superiority of the state. These different developments in social life have nothing above themselves but God, and that the state cannot intrude there and has nothing to command in their domain. Ari Oostlander is an official in the Dutch Christian Democratic Party of today and a recent Christian Democratic member of the European Parliament. He summarized this concept of sphere sovereignty in these words: every sphere of life has its own objective, its own character, its own autonomy, and its own rights. Precisely this is what is meant by the idea of a pluralist society. Subsidiarity and sphere sovereignty both contain the principle that the intermediary social structures lying between the individual on the one hand and the state on the other possess an inherent right to a certain autonomy, a right to be what they are and to follow the calling as they perceive it. They possess a rightful but limited autonomy that they receive not from a sovereign state, but directly from the natural order of things, that is, from God. In summary, then, the basic contentions of the thinking I just described can be summarized under three headings. One, intrinsic to the nature of human society are a host of communities, associations of other social structures that, two, make human flourishing and a healthy, well-functioning society possible, And 3, possess a certain autonomy or independence that is theirs as an inalienable right and that governments are bound to honor and respect. It is in the context of the pluralism resulting from these social structures that human beings live their lives and are able to flourish as beings with religious, economic, emotional, reasoning, procreative, artistic, and other facets. In this new mindset, then, a healthy society is a pluralist society, marked by a diversity of organizations and other social structures. Faith-based human service organizations are a part of this pluralism of society, as they help persons to live out their calling as religious beings, as they provide needed assistance to others. They take their part as an important feature of human society and play an important part in the world of public policies that provide services to the public. Thus, they deserve an underlying respect and acceptance as a means for persons to live out the commands of their faith and for meeting human needs. Emerging out of this respect and acceptance arises an acknowledgement of their right to an autonomy that protects their differences in belief and practice. All persons are not expected to live out their faith in the same way or to meet the needs of those facing adversity in the same manner. Diversity is normal and to be accepted. This differs sharply from the dominant American mindset that seeks to squeeze the faith-based organizations into a secular mold and penalizes them when they refuse that mold. More specifically, what does all this mean for the threats to religious liberty I mentioned at the beginning of this lecture? What does it mean for Notre Dame and the Obama administration's contraceptive mandate, and for evangelical adoption agencies that refuse to place children with same-sex couples, and for on-campus student religious clubs that have belief and behavior standards for their leaders in keeping with their religious traditions? After all, I am basically a public policy guy, so I always ask how our thinking can and should affect our society's reactions to today's issues and controversies. So let me close today by suggesting 4 implications for the contemporary American polity if the new mindset I've been describing would gain general acceptance. First, number 1 here, the perspectives and resulting mindset I have put forth defines a rightful, legitimate, respected place for faith-based organizations as faith-based organizations in the network of public services. They occupy a defined space in between the individual and the state. They would no longer be seen as organizations whose religious nature is irrelevant to the services they provide. My second observation grows out of the first one. The religious freedom of faith-based organizations active in the public realm would be respected and protected. The right to have religious criteria for their membership, boards, executive leaderships, and staffs would be protected, even when receiving partial government funding for the services they are providing the public. And when the public policy-making process decides services that run counter to certain religious traditions should be nevertheless be provided to the public. Think here, for example, contraceptive and same-sex adoptions. Conscientious objections in those cases, or conscientious exemptions in those cases, would be provided for faith-based organizations with sincere, well-established, religiously based objections to providing such services. They would be seen as genuinely religious organizations and thus possessing religious freedom rights that must be protected in a polity committed to religious freedom. The third conclusion to which the new mindset I urge today would be is the existence of a rich plurality of organizations in the various fields of human endeavor. We are a diverse society, and our associational life should reflect that diversity. On secular college campuses, there ideally would be Christian student organizations free to hold to traditionally Christian beliefs and sexual behavioral standards. But by the same token, ideally, there would be gay and lesbian student organizations holding to quite different sexual behavior behavioral standards. The existence of religious freedom for persons of all faiths and of none depends upon there being a pluralistic public square where there is genuine choice. If we as a society truly believe in diversity and pluralism, we should not try to force religiously based organizations into a secular mold, but neither should we attempt to force secularly oriented organizations into a religious mold or to follow our religious behavioral standards. That is what pluralism and diversity are all about. My fourth observation is that the mindset I am advocating today must never become a cover for favoring certain religious traditions or religion generally over other religious traditions or over secular belief systems and organizations. Freedom and choice are the key themes in what I'm advocating. To me, this means at a minimum that secular organizations, up to including those that take an active anti-religious stance, and minority religious communities, such as Native American religion, Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, and others, they all have the same religious freedom rights as do major religious groups, such as Christians in our various manifestations, and Jews, whether Reformed, Conservative, or Orthodox. I have argued for Christian student groups to be able to meet on secular university campuses, even when they insist on certain belief and behavioral standards for their leaders. But the same principle applies to gay and lesbian student organizations, student groups that ridicule and mock religious faith, and Muslim student organizations. In addition, this means the ability of faith-based organizations not to provide certain services that run counter to their faith tradition must never be used in an attempt to deny persons access to those services from providers who do not have religious objections to providing them. A faith-based adoption agency, for example, should have the right to refuse to facilitate same-sex adoptions if doing so runs counter to their religious beliefs. But I believe it should inform a same-sex couple of other adoption agencies that do same-sex adoptions. A Catholic hospital should have the right to refuse to do a sterilization procedure that runs counter to its religiously based beliefs. But it should also inform the person whom it has refused of other hospitals or clinics willing to do this procedure. Pluralism and a commitment to diversity where we as a society live together, even with our deepest differences, means religious exemptions ought not to be used by religiously based public service organizations to pressure or discourage others from obtaining membership or employment in other organizations, or to receive services elsewhere that they feel they, in good conscience, cannot provide. Just as secularists ought not to impose their beliefs onto Christians and other religionists and their organizations, so also Christians and other religionists ought not to impose their beliefs onto others. This mindset, if accepted and implemented, would result in the deeply religious among us being fully free to practice their faith, including as members of institutions or communities in which they can freely live out their faiths. The irreligious among us would be equally free to live their lives without restrictions and pressures as individuals and as members of their institutions and communities. A greater diversity and pluralism that genuinely respects and makes room for those of all faiths and of none, I believe, would result. So, that's what I had to say. Thank you for listening. Also, I think many of the First Amendment and individual religious freedom rights, and the Supreme Court has made many decisions on them, would apply to the for-profit individuals, especially if it's not a large corporation. Now, Hobby Lobby may pose somewhat of a different issue, but why, let me just say this in addition, why I think the for-profit world poses a somewhat different issue is that I think as we face what is a very sensitive issue, I mean as Christians who have problems with a gay lifestyle, all of you may not share that with me, but I'm speaking from, that's a perspective that I hold to, from which I'm speaking. This is a sensitive area, and I see it's so important for faith-based organizations that have trouble with same-sex adoptions or hiring a practicing gay or lesbian person as needing to be consistent. If they pick out, what they see as the sin of a same-sex lifestyle, but meanwhile, two heterosexuals who are not married and are living together, or even someone who's a slumlord, or I always like to say a blatant gossiper. St. Paul talks more about the sin of gossiping than the sin, than almost any other sin. The Hobby Lobby store, sort of winks and looks away at that, but when it comes to same-sex issues, then we draw, well, I think there's, and I don't know any for-profit business that before it will sell you something, it sort of does this moral check, or before you, so I don't know. It's a tough issue. Maybe someday I can handle it. Then your second question was, I talked about, informing persons where they can obtain certain services that for example, the Catholic hospital, whether it's abortion, sterilization, whatever it might be, would not be able to perform given its religious beliefs. And here, I do make a fine distinction. I think there's a difference between informing someone and making a referral. And I see making a referral as saying, okay, here's somebody who will provide that service, perhaps even calling and making an appointment. When my doctor refers me to a specialist, he usually will set up an appointment. He will call that, or will refer me to a specific individual and maybe even make the appointment. I see that as a referral. Informing could simply be, look, we urge you not to get this procedure. We think in the long run, give you reasons, but say if you persist in it, we're not trying to block you from getting that procedure. If you feel you want it and need it, and here's a place you can go. Now that may be unsatisfactory. I know, especially maybe more so in the Catholic than Protestant tradition, this whole referral raises a lot of red flags. But I have personally, anyway, come down on the side of, we really need to be careful from trying, if we're going to demand full rights for us and our organizations to live out our faith, that should be the focus, not trying to stop other persons who may reject our moral teachings from being pressured or forced or squeezed into following our, whether it's Catholic or evangelical Protestant or whatever, moral teachings. So, I saw your hand earlier too.
Two questions. How do you apply this principle and this mindset to the subject of abortion? And then secondly, how do you define organization when members of that organization, 90% of them might feel different than the directive that might come from Rome or wherever?
Yeah, that second one especially. You folks are good. You're raising all the tough issues. But no, on the first one, on abortion, what I did say is that to me, in this talk, the key issue isn't whether I personally or some other organization itself, accepts the morality of contraceptives or abortion or same-sex relationships or whatever. To me, the key question is the right of a faith-based, a religiously based service-providing organization to follow its religiously based beliefs and moral standards, even if I disagree with them.